The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Lou, I can't remember if it's good morning or good afternoon, but good morning, depending on where you are. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to Financial Rebellion. Polly is with family having a wonderful time. We miss her, but you're going to get Twyla and Carolyn today. We're going to talk about digital ID, programmable money, and what does Jeffrey Epstein have to do with everything, and what does that have to do with the war? We're going to try and connect all the dots. But first, the news. So, Lou, first story. Trump signs a directive to accelerate 6G deployment to operate implantable technologies. And before we say anything about this, can we just show this is several years ago at the World Economic Forum. We have the head of one of the largest telephone companies in the world, Nokia, talking about what implantable technologies mean.
About 6G earlier, which is around 2030, I would say that by then, definitely the smartphone as we know it today will not anymore be the usual kind of the most common interface. Wow. Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies.
Carolyn, got a comment?
What a nightmare. It leaves you speechless.
Well, remember, you and I were, I think you were there. We were in Malmo with Richard Werner in 2023, and he described one of the top central bankers of Europe saying it was going to be a chip and it was going to be put in your hand. Of course, Christians across the country know what mark of the beast means, but now to do all of this, of course, as we know, oh Jesus, look how horrible this one is. You need a very high precision digital ID. So, Twyla, comments on 6G and what it means to the digital ID system?
Yeah, so I was just reading a comments from a trial attorney group who said that I'll just read this little quote. When technology promises global connectivity, an individual's entire life risks becoming one data breach away from disclosure. And it says, and along with that risk, 6G offers an almost utopian promise of privacy. Really? The fact of the matter is, I don't think people actually want to have a chip, put into them. And although they are saying that with, healthcare, this is going to be amazing things. And of course, you have seen those demonstrations of somebody thinking who cannot move even their arms to make their arms move. And so there are certainly some things that seem to be really great. But when you talk to the centralizers and they're planning to do this, then you understand that this is just like, they have so much control when it is in you, right? When it's in you. That's what it sounds like to me. That's where they want to go.
They can affect your feelings, they can affect your thoughts, they can implant thoughts, and they can kill you. So if you don't behave, they cannot just cut off your money, they can kill you.
Plus, a lot of this is the brain, right? And so, these attorneys were talking about, we have to consider what happens when they get brain damage from the implantable device, and how many millions that will cost. So you can kind of see where they're thinking of going. But the last thing that you want is the government or anybody else having a chip in your brain or anywhere in your body that they can use to control and track.
Well, and Apple just spent $2 billion buying a company that specializes in software that's going to read your thoughts, from your body language and other biological things, basically predicting behavior. We're getting into some science fiction type stuff here.
Right. And I think I want to keep coming back to the fact, if you look at how this is all being funded and financed, we're financing it. We're funding it both with taxpayers' money. Go look at your 401k. You're the guy who's financing this. You can change that. Okay, next story, Lou. Okay, so great event in the European Parliament, Make Europe Healthy Again. The great Richard Warner was there, so let's just play this clip.
Reality as human nature. If you give people power and too much
Can't
power,
hear it, Lou.
will lead to bad results. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we have to stop the further spread of digital ID and the introduction of CBDCs. Already Europe is being deindustrialized, economically destroyed. We can't give these central planners that have delivered this yet more powers. Instead, we need to decentralize, break up the concentrated power, oppose digital ID. We are sovereign individuals. We don't need to prove our identity. If somebody wants to check identity, well, that's their problem. We need to oppose digital asset registers and tokenization of our assets and of nature. And we need, most of all, of course, to oppose CBDCs. A decentralized monetary system is the future. Many small local banks in a decentralized fashion implementing subsidiarity, that is proven to be very successful. That's how
are working on the verifiable digital health wallet. This is the pillar of the control grid. There are four aspects. I think of it as almost like a four-legged chair. There are four aspects to creating a trap for humanity. One is digital IDs, one is central bank digital currencies, or any other kind of currencies that are programmable. One is artificial intelligence, and the last one is the physical infrastructure that is required by artificial intelligence. Now, these digital IDs can be used to establish an infrastructure that could lead to a Chinese-style social credit system. And the pretext for this change, it can be, the pretext can be to stop illegal immigration, or to stop election fraud, or to protect children. But whatever the pretext, the result is the same: building a control grid.
Okay, that was Reggie Littlejohn. So, Twyla, to you. Lou, do we have any more stories we want to cover today? I think we have a few more. Reggie just talked about the different aspects of the control grid and the importance of combining these together with AI. And so that means data management, data organization, data implementation. So the Department of Homeland Security, which has been running the building of a detention center network around the United States, just awarded Palantir a new contract with a value of $1 billion. And if you look at the contracts that have been poured into this aspect, again, you are paying for this if you are a citizen of the United States. We just saw Switzerland deny a contract to Palantir, a big article in December, but Switzerland denied it because they felt they could not assure data sovereignty, and data sovereignty is becoming a bigger issue. And one of the reasons they couldn't assure data sovereignty is they couldn't assure themselves that Palantir was not going to share the data with the U.S. and the U.S. was not going to share the data with Israel. And so to maintain data sovereignty, they did not give the contract, and a cooperative of journalists published the story in December. They are now suing. So if you don't get the contract, you sue. Any comments, Carolyn or Twyla?
Yeah, I would just point out that the inimitable Whitney Webb has told us all about how Palantir basically is the ultimate in the evolution from the promised software in the 90s that we were dealing with that was stolen by the Department of Justice, and then it went through iterations, and it's basically a privatized company that was seeded by the CIA.
Well, what's interesting is, and we're going to talk about it later, is the Epstein network, which was developed by Epstein, has now been institutionalized, and the data management companies and organization is a big part of institutionalizing that whole process. So, Lou, any more stories? Yes. So we want to get everybody collecting data for us, including the banks. And the banks are in a tricky position because the Trump administration, once the Clarity Act is passed, is planning on rolling out digital assets that you heard Richard Warner talking about under the Clarity Act and under the Genius Act, stablecoins, it's a way of creating private CBDCs and using the whole financial system to implement a form of private CBDCs. Politically, they couldn't get away with CBDCs. Now they're trying to sneak back in with a privatized version that does the same things. But of course, part of that is making sure there's no leakage in the data and you're getting data from everywhere. So the banking system, the traditional banking system, is right at the heart of the war, and it's one of the reasons we've seen the Clarity Act held up as the banks versus the fintech firms debate what programmable money is going to try and look like. And Carolyn and I are very busy out with the states trying to pass uh, model legislation that you can find on Solari at our Financial Transaction Freedom website to stop programmable money. The states, under the U.S. Constitution, have the power to stop programmable money, and if we don't stop it, this control grid is going to go into effect. Any more stories, Lou?
Can I just add here that
Yeah,
the,
please.
the banking, healthcare, the things that people really need. I mean, the next thing is we're at the grocery stores, right? because, people need money, people need health, people need food. And of course, they are gathering some information, through the food stores. But, I was concerned with, and Catherine, you'll remember what the name is of this act is when they really started requiring the banks to collect information and to stop you at the $10,000, all of
Bank
that.
Secrecy Act.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, right. And so it's like they're targeting the places where people have to go, where people are vulnerable and have a hard time saying no, so that they can access the data that they want. Because, what are we to do? That's the other thing with the phones. That's the whole movement to the phones being digital. I was just taking things off of my phone where they have access to my microphone, they have access to my camera and all this kind of stuff I didn't even know was in there. But the fact of us needing our phone, we don't even have phones that we can go to on the street anymore, right? It's like we
Right.
have to have the surveillance device in our hand. And so when the government and the corporations use our vulnerabilities to get the data that will control us, and I don't think that people see that, but
Right.
that's what's happening.
This is where my phone stays, in the Faraday bag. It is off and it's in the Faraday bag, and so is Carolyn's. So we should say, do you have one, Twyla? We will send you one.
No, I don't. I've thought
Yeah.
I need to get one, but yeah, love one.
We will send you one. Okay, Lou, any more stories? Pennsylvania attorney calls for Congress to pass Kids Online Safety Act. We know that 40 attorney generals are now encouraging Congress to pass laws basically forcing kids to verify their age, which means everybody's got to end up essentially with a digital ID system to use the internet, which means, if you don't behave, they can turn off your internet access. And the frightening thing about this to me is Carolyn and I have spent a lot of time understanding the Epstein network. And a lot of it, as Carolyn mentioned, thanks to Whitney Webb, who wrote the sort of two early definitive books on the Epstein network. And if you understand the Epstein network, where it came from and what it is growing into, which we'll talk about today, what we're talking about is using children's safety to give dictatorial powers to the people who ran Epstein. So we are now, in the interest of children's safety, we are saying, let's give total control to the internet and our kids to the pedophiles. It's like, are you crazy? It's a complete inversion. Anyway,
Well, and this is similar to when our friend Thomas Massey provided a list to the DOJ of people whose names they wanted to redact, the victims. That was released as part of the Epstein files, so that they actually had a list of all the victims so that they could be re-victimized and made public. Well, you collect information about where all the kids are. What happens to that?
I saw the cute, people are so funny. I saw the cutest post on social media that said, We've now raided many more raw milk farms than we've raided Epstein clients. Okay, so we have an update for you on digital ID. The core central feature of implementing a control grid is a digital ID, which is why Twyla's work is so very important, because if you don't stop that, the rest can flow out from there. And so at the heart is a digital ID. You have updates for us, Twyla, so take it away.
Yes. So, there's just stories, right, coming out. And then there is, what's happening with the $45 fee or fine, at the airport. And I want to just tell you that I use the opportunity of flying. I use flying as an opportunity to connect with TSA agents and just ask them questions. So when I was in Minneapolis, I said to the TSA, by the way, I get a pat down, which helps me have a close proximity to have asked questions. And so anyway, in Minneapolis, I said, so, because it was like 3 days or 4 days after the fee started. And I took pictures of all the places where it was talking about the fee and how it talked about the fee. And very interestingly, the signs have changed to not say get a real ID, to fly. It says if you don't have acceptable ID. So the words acceptable
Wow.
ID are now big rather than real ID. That was an astonishing thing to see. But the TSA agent, when I said, well, how is it going with that $45, fee? And she said, amazingly, there's not that many people. So I think they have successfully gotten people to do it at home before they come. And then when I was in Fort Myers, very interestingly, with the camera. So in the Fort Myers airport, now I could have missed it, but I did not see one single sign, not by the camera or in the line, that said you can opt out of the camera. So then I got up to the camera and I just looked at the guy and I said, I'm opting out. And he goes, well, look at all the cameras all around here. You're opting out. I just didn't say anything to him. He said, well, put your card in. So I put my card in. And then he asked me to hand it to him. So I handed it to him. And then he looks at it and goes, see, got your photo right there. So, they're just so dismissive of you actually, protecting yourself against what's going on here. I mean, they might be clueless, but that's the first airport where it didn't say that I could opt out. But of course I could, and I did. So, that's an interesting piece. I don't know really what's happening with the $45. There were no lines, there were no kiosks. The Los Angeles Times said that there were going to be kiosks at airports. Well, if anybody sees a kiosk, I'd love a picture. I saw nothing of the sort. I don't know. There was nowhere to pay any money. So I think it's all being handled online, lots of times by people doing it in advance. The other thing I'd like to say is the Real ID, when you look at the list of the acceptable IDs, it has changed. So I used to say there were 16 acceptable IDs. They've now added a seventh, which is a mobile driver's license. Plus, at the very bottom of the list, they say that they are testing out 3 different digital IDs: Google, Amazon, and another big one that I'm just forgetting. Apple? Apple, I didn't say Apple, right? So they're testing whether those can be used. So I think there is some recognition, perhaps, that people are not going to move to the Real ID. And that in order to fly, and that's the big thing, right? The whole thing was to convince everybody into the Real ID because you were going to challenge them about the fact that they couldn't fly. And people have gotten wind of what the fact is here. Lots of people signing up to get passports and passport cards. But interestingly enough, know this about the situation that the country has been put in by digitization. Just a few days ago, a Ukrainian national was arrested and pleaded guilty to faking the biometrics and the photos in particular on social security cards, driver's licenses, passports, and passport cards. He had garnered $1.2 million by the time that they caught him. And the thing about biometrics is you don't you can't switch your face, you can't switch your fingerprints, right? It's different than a than a number. And so this entire movement to, biometrify the world. And by the way, in 2007, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, that's what he said in a sort of obscure publication. And he said, we are gradually biometrifying a large proportion of the world's population. Now, this is coming out of our government, the United States government, this comment, right? He was head of DHS. And so this movement to biometrify, but also, as you were talking about earlier, to put this in your body, a chip in your body. So all of this is leading in a very concerning direction. But I think, we're having some success here with Real ID, people switching, people getting passports instead. I talked to a reporter who said he didn't know anything about the Real ID, but he just had a feeling. And so he decided to get a passport instead. So that's really smart. The last thing is the SAVE Act. So I don't know what's going to happen with the SAVE Act. There's certainly a lot of push to make this happen, and this is to make sure that we have an ID before we vote, to make sure that everybody who votes is an actual citizen. And one of the things that's listed as a potential identifier, which even I misunderstood, and I got it from the author, the actual information here, the use of a real ID that has an identifier that indicates citizenship. And the Real ID does not indicate citizenship. And as a matter of fact, there are entire classes of people who are considered non-citizens that can get the Real ID. So in some ways, they've shot themselves in the foot by even claiming that, Real ID can prove citizenship. It can't. And in legal documents or documents sent to a court in December, DHS said that Real ID is insufficient to prove citizenship, right? And so, oh shoot, I just forgot where the main point that I was going to add after that. This idea that Real ID is citizenship, and of course it isn't, and the SAVE Act, that's what it is, the SAVE Act. So the SAVE Act has a Real ID that indicates citizenship. So in contacting the author, Chip Roy, the office of the author, we found out that what they're really talking about there is the enhanced driver's license. There are only 6 states that have enhanced driver's licenses. They're considered Real ID. They have the star on them, and they let you go like between the United States and Canada. All 6 states are up at the Canadian border. So they're not talking about every Real ID, but just the enhanced driver's license. So I think those are pieces of interest. Oh, and then one story which tomorrow I'm actually having a conversation with the woman that this occurred to. But somewhere in New Jersey, a woman wanted to visit a friend or a family member or whomever in the hospital, and they required identification. She was there with her sister, I think, or another friend. Anyway, the other friend passed, but she couldn't get in because when they looked at her Real ID, they said, well, you're not vaccinated. Like, what? So I don't know what this all means, but that was the story that we received. And tomorrow, when we have an interview essentially with this woman, we're going to find out more details. Is there a connection there, or is there just a misinterpretation?
So
I
was
have
she
no idea.
able to get from the hospital the what it was on the Real ID that could tell them? So
So
I've been told by emergency room doctors that they can dial into a database
that's true.
and basically look at all U.S. citizens or at residents to see not only who's vaccinated, but what batch they got.
Yeah, so it's possible that it has nothing to do with the Real ID, but that they just tapped into the state immunization database by using the Real ID, that there's no
Right.
actual connection. But if that's what it is, that it's not about the Real ID, it's about the problem of the state immunization registries, which we have long tried to stop. And those have been digitized, and they are trying to, at a pharmacy, the pharmacy will know every vaccination that you've had. The doctors can know every vaccination that you've had and have not had because of the state immunization registries. And most people don't know that those exist and that there's no consent over them. There could be, right? We can get that in there, but there isn't for the most part today.
Oh, Twyla, I have a
So
question. What about those of us who have had no immunization? We're not in the database. Are they using that to determine that you are not vaccinated?
Well, the real question is, are you really not in the database? Right. So it's entirely possible. It depends on how the database is and what the interconnection is between the hospital and the clinics and the health department's database as to do they just come in and scrape the system for everybody who's vaccinated and then see who isn't. I think those are questions that need yet to be determined. But I am here to tell you that I got a vaccination at some point during COVID. Before I really realized that tetanus vaccination doesn't protect you for 6 months. So it was like worthless. But anyway, and I said, do not put it in the database. And then it popped up at my doctor's office. I'm like, I signed the form that said, do not. So I went back to Walmart and I said, yeah, was it Walmart? Well, wherever it was that I went. Anyway, I went back to them and I said, take that out of there. I said, I signed and I said no. And they said, well, see, that's what happens here. When you've got the database, it's up to you to try to protect yourself from ever being in it. And because nobody does, they just generally believe that you're just going to be going into the database. They don't actually look to see whether you signed the consent form or not. They make assumptions, they put everything in. And then once you're in, you can't get out. And even if you could get out, you'd be registered as getting out because they always keep a piece of the data.
Yes, and when you go to the doctor, they're often, certainly in the emergency room, they're recording what you say. So if they want to give you a vaccine and you say no, they may be recording that you say no and putting it into this massive medical database.
Well, I
So
have
I
to
just
say,
assume
I would love to do an entire show on the recording now that's happening in the exam room and to get people to understand how to stop it, what to do, how it comes in, what it looks like, what it sounds like, the words they use. That could be an entire show.
let's do that in April.
I was going to say, okay,
Yeah.
let's get it on.
You're
the
That's
on.
calendar.
fantastic.
Twyla, you're totally on. That would be fantastic.
Mhm.
Because it's and one of the things I assume when I'm dealing with any data collection system, they're lying. They always everything's a lie. That's what you have to understand. Carolyn and I call it the data beast. Okay, so I do want to say that what we're talking about is a system that not just provides data, but that data is then being converted to be used, and it's to be used to control your health. It's being used or organized to control your food, and a lot of that control is going to come through the programmable money, which is why it's both the digital ID and the connection to the programmable money and other things that can be turned on and off. We see Congress now, Congressman Massey fighting the kill switch in your car because literally you don't behave, they can turn off your car if it's an electric car, right? So I don't know. Are you seeing, Twyla, are you seeing more understanding in your audience between the digital ID and how it can be applied and used? Is that finally getting
Yes.
through?
Yes, but it is a major educational program. I run up against people who say, "But we need it for voting. We need it for we need it to keep illegals out. We need it for this, that." It's just nothing, and it takes. I mean, it takes things like just telling people the DMVs have testified to Congress that they plan to digitize it, put it on your phone, and have remote access. That is one of the things that makes people stand back and go, "What?" And then, the law itself, where it says, it's for access to federal buildings, nuclear facilities, commercial flight, and any other purpose that the secretary shall determine. Some of them don't believe, the whole social credit system until you pull all the elements together. And you realize that even those words, for any other purpose that the secretary shall determine, can mean access to your bank, opening a bank, using the money, how you use the money in order to, of course, prevent, illegals or to prevent fraud or, whatever, or for safety. I mean, those are the things that they use to build the digital prison, is all of those things that people just buy, as truth until they realize what's really going on in the background.
So it's really interesting because we had clean elections before digital technology.
Mhm.
And in fact, if you look at the elections, they have been steadily compromised by the digital technology. And so it's the opposite. If we went back to 100% analog, I dare say it would be a lot easier to keep the elections clean. Now, you certainly had plenty of dirty elections in the analog system. And the key to running honest elections is having honest election boards and implementation by humans who are honest. Because the way you control the technology is not the technology. The way you control the technology is by controlling the people who control the technology. It's very simple. Anyway, I always have this debate with some of my partners because I remember being on Wall Street and literally swinging around billions of dollars with hundreds of different firms in a syndicate, and we had landlines and number two pencils, and everything worked flawlessly. I
Mhm.
just went. I don't know when you were in Sarasota if you've ever been to the Ringling Brothers
Who have
circus
wanted to go?
museum. Oh, it's wonderful.
I've heard.
Sarasota is just wonderful, and the museum is fantastic. But they have it's like a toy set of the entire Ringling Circus, and so
Mm.
it's an exact replica with tiny people and tiny trains and tiny trucks, and literally they would take the circus, bring it up and take it down, just all people working together, no digital technology, and then move it, to the next town in trucks. So you're moving elephants and giraffes, and you watch it and you study how the operation worked, all worked flawlessly with no email, with no text, with no digital technology. So the reality is, many young people have forgotten that these things can work flawlessly without this stuff. And essentially all we're doing is integrating a surveillance system that can surveil us, that can influence our thinking and our feelings. So we're basically spending a huge amount of time in our daily lives providing and managing the data that will allow central control of us. And that central control comes with enormous interference that is literally destroying our elections, is playing games with the immigration, and on and on and on and on. And I have to tell you, our project management, when we had telephones and landlines and no surveillance tracking, and entrainment technology, was more efficient. I don't see more efficiency. I see less integrity. And
Oh,
communication with integrity can do, I'm sure in nursing you saw it.
so I got out of it in time, according to my colleagues, to start this. But I think, all you have to do is, go into a store, right? You're going to return something. They have to go find it on the machine. They have to, look at the receipt. They have to get the two receipts together. And then eventually, and maybe they need your card or maybe they don't. But it used to be that if you return something, you'd return it, they look at the receipt, they pull you out cash, you hand it to them, and off you go. I mean, you can look at into any transaction and see how much more time it takes because we have computerization than it used to take with just paper, pencil, and money. And
Right.
so I think that's everywhere. I know I talked to an ENT once, and I was talking about the electronic health record, which is a clunky system. For those of you who think it's really wonderful, it's very clunky and it gets in between you and your doctor. But he said when they were forced to bring in the government version of the government approved version for electronic health records, they had to add 7 administrators just to deal with the computers and the electronic health records. 7. So do not think that this makes anything less expensive or more efficient. It's all inefficiency, all expense, and then all surveillance and outside control because of this entire system that's been imposed upon us by the government.
Right. I know.
Twyla, I have two questions
Mhm.
before we move on, because I know we are going to. One is about the SAVE Act. I've heard women say that there's a provision in the SAVE Act that you have to have a birth certificate that matches your ID, which would mean that women who've changed their names as a result of marriage and have not gone through a process of doing it, through the probate court or whatever, cannot do that. Is that true?
So when I'm just looking at the law right now, it's called documentary proof of United States citizenship. And there are tons of things here, but a lot of them do say that they have to bring in a birth certificate with it. And so I don't know if if it's exactly like you say. I would be more suspect. I would be more likely to believe that that is true than not true, but I don't want to say for sure, having not looked at every detail about everyone. But I remember in looking at the list that it had plus birth certificate behind several of them.
Right. And my other question has to do with, I just want to clarify, do you oppose putting these digital identities on your phone, the Amazon, the Apple and all of that uh, on your phone? I mean, you oppose that, right?
Yeah,
We're
because
talking about how convenient it is, but
it is, and the real question is, to what end are you doing this? You're doing it for convenience, they're doing it for control. So they've made a system where they get all of your data and you get convenience, but the price of convenience is outside control and surveillance. So to the degree that you have to use a phone, because of course they took away all of the public, telephones that you could even use, right? So now if you don't have one, you can be unable to communicate with anyone. But so to the degree that you have to use it, great. But to the degree that you can take off every identification thing, not use it for payment of all things, and definitely not digitize the ID on the phone. Whether it's through Apple or Google or all these different ones that the airlines are going to accept and that TSA is going to accept, get out of those systems and actually, find other ways of paying for things or go to other places to pay for things to keep the rest of the businesses alive in this country other than Amazon. I love Amazon because you can find things you can't find anywhere else, but you also want to make sure that you actually have small businesses that yet live in this country.
So I use Amazon to find them, and then I go find where I can get
Yes,
them.
I've done that too.
Okay, so let's turn to programmable money. Digital IDs lead to effective programmable money. Our term of the day is programmable money. So I'm turning it over to you, Carolyn.
yes, Lou, do you have the definition from our model code? Okay, this is from our model legislation that we've been showing to legislators in various states. And this is the definition of programmable money. And under this model code, if the legislation is adopted, it would prohibit forcing someone to have only one payment method, which would be programmable money. So programmable money can be encoded with specific rules and conditions that allow the medium of exchange to be automatically controlled and used according to predefined parameters. So that might be, you can't use it outside a 10 miles from your house, or you can't use it to buy guns or whatever. The second part, and these are alternative things. It has a capability of allowing for the denial or approval of specific transactions. So that it basically turns off your ability to spend it according to what's programmed into it. It allows for user-specific restrictions on usability or on location, nature, time, or identity of the transaction or parties to the transaction. So it might prevent you from buying from a particular company that is on somebody's hate list. It expires or diminishes other than being subject to ordinary inflation, meaning, you have $10 worth on Monday, and a year from Monday, it's gone because it's expired. And then probably, well, one of the most important things is that it might be used to implement a social credit score system. And that is the a la China, where they can actually prevent people from going from one part of a city to another by having they've spoken out against the government or whatever, and they can't go from, they've got some sort of reader between one place, at a door or a place where you go from one part of the city to another, and it prevents you from going. And so the important thing is that this is like what we opposed in the form of a CBDC, which would have the programming by the U.S. government. Well, not the U.S. government, the central bank, which is the Federal Reserve in this country. But imagine that private companies could do the same thing that the government could do, or the Fed could do for a CBDC. And so in a lot of cases, this is opposed by banks and some others that say that we shouldn't interfere with private commerce. But the fact
So,
is, you've got a CBDC, only
Carolyn,
somebody private is controlling it.
let me just interrupt. Remember when the government was saying it wasn't censoring, but it turned out all the social media companies had a pipeline from the government, and the government was telling them what to censor and what not. So
Exactly.
they were just a face that couldn't be FOIA'd, remember? They were just a face that couldn't be FOIA'd, and they were implementing essentially the social credit control system that the government was dictating behind the scenes. So the government was sneaky and hiding behind them. Okay, when the public said clearly we don't want CBDC, through the Genius Act, they set up the same exact mechanism. You have a pipeline from Treasury. We have a wonderful article at Solari on the Genius Act and its implications for financial transaction freedom. So you have a pipe from Treasury that's used to implement know your customer rules, like the ones we've just seen from the banking, and money laundering rules and sanctions, but anything can go from that pipe. There is nothing to stop that pipe from doing a full-on CBDC system through the Treasury pipeline. It's just, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, and it's just the same pipe coming in, but hiding behind a private face. And we're now going around the country and people saying, well, private companies should be free to do what they want. We want freedom. We don't want restrictions. No, you want guardrails that say private companies can't be used to implement central bank digital control through that Treasury pipeline, because that is exactly what's being set up. And I keep telling everybody, you have to put the bridle and the saddle on the horse before it leaves the barn.
Absolutely.
And stable coins and digital assets, if you listen to Larry Fink et al., Wall Street saying they're going to explode it into hundreds and trillions of dollars of volume. And when that happens, if you don't have the guardrails on, if you think they can kill you with CBDC, they can drive a truck through that mechanism. So these private CBDCs are set up to be worse than CBDCs, because if you do a CBDC, Congress has authority, and there are tremendous transparency and other requirements of the central bank. If you do it through the private fintech companies, they are free to rock and roll. There are, the restrictions are much less direct. And I will tell you, this private CBDC is far more dangerous than CBDC. And that's what we're trying to stop. We're trying to get the guardrails on. So if you're interested in getting this passed in your state, go to the Financial Transaction Freedom website at Solari. We have briefings. We're just about to publish a wonderful briefing that we did on programmable money. We have model legislation. You have to stop this. Carolyn, back to you. Sorry.
Yes, just wanted to point out that the issuers of these programmable monies are often major contractors. Think about Amazon, and have major contracts with the U.S. government. So if you think that they're going to say no, if the federal government says do this and do that through the money. And understand that this money, this programmable money, it's either the programming is either physically in the digital money or it's part of the system that the money can't be used without what's called a smart contract that would do the same thing. So we're talking
Right.
about blockchains and things like that, but it's not the same thing as a, for example, Medicaid card issued by the state of California that only allows you to buy certain things with your, or your food stamps, I meant, that only allows you to buy certain foods. It's not something completely in a different system. Those are not affected by what we're talking about. Those can be used, nefariously also. But what we're talking about is legislating that you can't have it built into the currency and then force people that that's the only way they can spend their money.
So, so I want to bring up, there's a new commentary at Solari called "Is Jeffrey Epstein the father of programmable money?" Of course, the answer being yes, although he was an agent for what is described, I think, very correctly as the Rothschild network. So in America, many people say Rothschild. I was brought up using the European Rothschild, but same network. And the commentary at Solari points you to a series done by a writer writing anonymously under the name of ESC, ESC as in escape. And what our commentary does is it points you to all the posts from January 30th on. And in my opinion, this is the single best, after Whitney Webb, this is the single best description of the Epstein network and the governance of the Epstein network and the goal of the Epstein network. If you study what Epstein was doing, he was, in my opinion, laundering money, including money coming out of the United States government. That's not what ESC focuses on. What he's focusing on is how Epstein reinvested that money as the equivalent of venture capitalists and philanthropists seeding the development of programmable money. And, seeding people both in academia and business, in all aspects of life, building and operating the different pieces you need to prototype and create digital money, including Bitcoin. So Carolyn and I, since the beginning of Bitcoin, have been saying this is a prototype to create CBDC and digital money. And, there's a wonderful group of freedom fighters in that community who've been very, I would say, very negative towards us. Is the only way I can describe it. And I just had one of the top luminaries of that whole world write me and say, "Oh my God, you were right. Will you be in our documentary?" It's like, oh, thank you, Houston. We have contacts. Anyway, but so ESC has done a marvelous job. I can't recommend it. Just read everything from January 30th on, and he describes how Epstein, developed and ran this and sort of built the prototyping. And then, as Whitney Webb has told us, once that all got institutionalized, you don't need Epstein anymore, particularly when you got FASB 56, which we've talked about many times. And so, out Epstein goes because now we've institutionalized. And that's why, Whitney will talk about Palantir as part of the now institutional capacity of what, Epstein as a venture capitalist or philanthropist helped seed and get started. But now it's being institutionalized. And the important thing to think of is this is like a booster rocket. After the booster rocket gets you to a certain point and you can institutionalize, then you just eject the booster rocket and keep on going. And if you look at if you look at the investment network, which are basically the equity pool around the central banks. So I'll just talk about it as the people who control the central banks. Once you've got the central banks ready to implement digital assets and stablecoins as programmable money, you don't need Epstein. You can let it go. And if you look at the lot of scandal of getting rid of the booster rocket, they're talking about the very lurid parts of Epstein, but they're not talking about, the control grid and how to stop it, with this exception. And I think this is why this Substack series is so exceptional. And if you really want to understand what Epstein was up to, but more importantly, what the structure that managed and controlled Epstein, whether it was the intelligence agencies or the investment money in and around the central banks that wants total digital control. So Epstein was building the control grid. Prototyping distributed ledgers was all part of that. He put a lot of money into mind control because the neuro warfare is a very, very important part of it. And we have a series at Solari, a series called Cognitive Liberty that's led by Josh Daum, and excellent. We have a great interview that Elsa von Hamlin did with the top academic expert on neurowarfare. And I strongly recommend the Cognitive Liberty series to neurowarfare because, and if you see how much Epstein was putting into that, and interestingly enough, Madoff poured enormous amounts of money into, that money never went to invest in securities, but one of the big places it went was for mind control research. So both Epstein and Madoff, big mind control. Anyway, we wanted to recommend this to you, but I also wanted to mention, what does this all have to do with the war in Iran? Because I think there is a direct connection between the things that are happening that Twyla and Carolyn and I have been discussing to build the control grid, digital ID, programmable money. But to do that, you need to stop the leakage in the central bank system. And that gets us back to Wesley Clark's, we're gonna invade 7 countries in 5 years. Of course, the last one being Iran. And so if you want a programmable money system, it's not surprising to me that we are in the middle of a war for Iran. But before we go to Iran, Carolyn and Twyla, any comments?
I can't. Oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to have a comment about what you said about a booster rocket, because I feel like the credit card was one of the first booster rockets.
Right.
Because the credit card got people not using their own money, got them to give a certain percent of their money to somebody else in order to pay for goods and services, and then got them to move ever close to digital. And I feel like people don't understand that. And when I look at the airlines, I was just thinking about this as you were talking. The airlines seems to be the place that the government uses to move people or control people or change their minds or whatever, right? Because I remember the first time I was on an airplane and they said that you could no longer use cash to buy, like snacks or anything, right? It was like, how is that possible? And I looked into the legal tender laws and realized that the legal tender laws are only for the government. It doesn't require private industry to let you use cash. And I don't think that should stay that way. And I just think that is where some of the things on the airlines, from moving away from cash for purchases and not even giving you the right to use cash to make a purchase, to imposing the mask mandate and now the real ID. The airlines is a battlefield and the airports are a battlefield, and everybody should see the airports
And
for what
the
they are.
DMV is a battlefield.
And
It's
the DMV is a
transportation.
battlefield. Yep.
Because spatial control is one of the big goals of the control grid.
Well, and the other thing I would say was, Carolyn, when you looked at that, when you showed us that list of programmable money, and I thought, well, this is of course perfect for the 15-minute cities that they want us all to live in. You cannot use, your money is not good outside of there. So if you decide to drive, there will be no gas available for you outside of here. And so this is what people do need to be thinking about.
So one of the things we talk a lot about, somebody will say, oh, well, cash is not convenient. Cash is old. You bring $100 of cash in a community and you spend it 10 or 20 times on a credit card, and it's all $100 has left. You spend $100 in credit card fees. You bring in $100 and you spend it 10 or 20 times and you still have $100.
Yeah.
So using cash is a very big money-making proposition. And if you look at how much the credit card companies are taking out, it's unbelievable. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'll never forget being in the Hong Kong airport in 2018 and buying a watch. And they presented me with two credit card machines, depending on whether I had a Chinese credit card or an American credit card. And so I paid with the American credit card, but I started asking them about the Chinese credit card, and they said, Chinese don't want the Americans to have their data.
Oh.
Yeah. So the part of the problem with the independent payment systems that BRIC is developing is, the Americans won't have access to the data.
Which is, it's for another day, but which is the reason for the war in Iran, because it's a monetary issue, because we
Right.
can't control Iran, and they're part of the BRICS, and they're a key member of the BRICS that is developing a system that's outside the US dollar. So
Well, if
Go
you
ahead.
look at if you look at the battle over the Straits of Hormuz, the question is whether or not we can cut off the oil coming from the Middle East to the Chinese. And you see the insurance companies shut down Western shipping, but they can't shut down the Chinese shipping because they're not dependent. And the Iranians are saying they're going to let the Chinese ships through. And meantime, the Americans are saying they're going to stop and they're going to take control of the Hormuz. So watch, the relationship between the energy in the Middle East and the leakage of the central banking system is one issue. Because if the Middle East is supplying China and the BRICS can create an independent system and India can buy oil from Russia, then you can't bring in the programmable money in the way that you could otherwise. And so this really goes to the heart of extending the dominance of the dollar system. And so get ready to relate how you use cash and what you do in your life to literally the war that is going on around the world. It's one war.
Right. Can
It's a
I
different
also
war.
say, and I think this is in the ESC Substack, but if you want to know if what your issue has to do with anti-vax and children, what does this have to do with that? Epstein was at the center. This whole network thing could not have happened, and the forcing of the shutdown of the economy across the world over a fake pandemic could not have happened without these networks. And Epstein and Bill Gates were like this, and they were using the idea of philanthropic donations to control the world. And so there's very little aspect of Western, anyway, control that is not affected by these systems and the digitalization of everything.
So I'm going to be even more blunt because we've got to go. Use cash, because if you build the digital systems, then you are going to make sure that the pedophiles will control your health, your food, your children, and your money. Right?
Yep.
It's simple. It's simple. Make cash great again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the Financial Rebellion. Twyla, thank you so much. I can't give out your website again. Please, ladies and gentlemen, support this woman's work. It is unbelievable. Don't say nobody's doing anything. Here's an example of a small group of people who are rocking the world and getting huge amounts done, and they're making a huge difference to you. Please, please support them. Give your website one more time, Twyla.
So our official website is cchfreedom.org, cchfreedom.org. And then Lou has kindly put refuserealid.org on the bottom where anybody can find information about our whole campaign against the Real ID.
Yeah. Take your money out of the control grid and put it in Twyla's pocket. Anyway, we will see you. Carolyn and I will see you next week. We have Margaret Byfield on Take Action, Protect Your Property Rights, another place where the programmable money guys are looking to plunder. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Lou. Great job.
Hi, my name is Barbara Wiebe, and I'm with Scarlett's Kids Foundation.
And you have 2 children. How old are they now?
We have 2 children that are vaccine injured, Scarlett, who's 10, and Violet, who's 13.
Okay, so when you were pregnant with your first child, Scarlett, did you have a conversation with anyone about vaccinations?
My first child, Violet.
Violet, sorry.
No, I didn't actually have any conversations with anybody about vaccinating, actually. I don't remember anything. I do remember when Scarlett was born and she started having a lot of health issues. One lady was really advocating for me, and I kept telling everybody that she was crazy. But then I later, I didn't realize what was going on with Scarlett until she had so many assaults. And my kids were pretty much fully vaccinated until a couple of years ago when we gave Scarlett her final round of vaccines for school, and she ended up in the hospital again. And that's when we decided our family had had enough. That was in 2018, right before COVID. And when COVID hit, we kind of already had a game plan as a family, which was super helpful because so many other people who are sharing custody and stuff have so many other issues with that. But I did notice with my first daughter, Violet, we had to get her into school because Scarlett had so many health problems that I had to pretty much stay at home full time and take care of her until she was better. And we gave Violet, we had only given her, I think, 1 shot at one time when she was 1. And I wasn't happy with the results. I wasn't happy with the fever. I wasn't happy with her constantly crying. And so I never gave her any other shots until we had to get her into school so that I had more time to get my hands on with Scarlett, get time in with her. And unfortunately, we kind of rushed in to get her into school. I didn't know that she had to have shots to get into school. And when I took her to the doctor, they gave her all of them. They gave her everything.
How many did she get?
It must have been 7. It was DTaP, IPV, MMR, HIB, the whole round. And I don't remember. I didn't bring everything with me. But I remember her having some very, very serious reactions to it. She had fever, she had a boil on her skin, she had the granuloma underneath her skin in her muscles, and she changed. That day she changed. She had ADHD really bad ever since that day. In fact, her first grade teacher told me she had the worst case of ADHD that she's ever seen in her career, and she just retired like 2 years ago. So I blamed it on the shots, but nobody wanted to listen to me. And so I just didn't have to give her anymore. So we didn't give her anymore. And then when Scarlett came along, she had health problems a couple weeks after she was born. She had the hepatitis B shot at birth and the K shot. And then 3 weeks later, ended up having to go to the emergency room with an unknown bowel obstruction. They couldn't tell me how it happened. And then she pretty much was on an ostomy bag for the first 6 months of her life. And they couldn't tell me how to heal her. They couldn't tell me any other kids that this had happened to. In fact, our surgeon said that he had worked on somebody about every 5 years, a kid like Scarlett pops up and they don't know what causes it. And I was asking him, like, I don't even know which support group to join because I don't know what's going on. He's like, why do you need a support group? That was when I started a support group for everybody at the hospital, and it's still going to this day. Needless to say, I thought nothing about the shots hurting Scarlett, and so I kept her on schedule her entire, I think she had 35 vaccines, antigens, by the time she was 1 year old, after I counted, or 25. It was an unreasonable amount. She had everything, I believe, except for 1 flu shot. And she also had the medical records to coincide with that after about 6 months. Okay, so when she was born, she ended up having to get this ostomy bag to get out of the hospital. She was on these special formulas and stuff. And at 6 months old, they had to go and take off her, they did a surgery like to resect her ostomy. And she was in the hospital for 5 days after that. And we were told to go to the pediatrician the immediate Monday after. And we went there and I was like, are we supposed to be getting our shots today? This isn't a well baby visit. This is just our visit after surgery. And he talked me into giving her everything right after surgery. So she immediately developed tics. When I went back and demonstrated the tics to him, he laughed at me in my face. And at 1 year old, she started developing breath holding spells, and she would pass out anytime that she would get upset or hurt. And we were wondering what that was caused from. She would have to constantly be on Miralax because her bowels weren't working. Anyways, fast forward till she was about 4.5, and I watched The Truth About Vaccines, and I watched it to be vindictive, to prove that that was the stupidest thing ever made, that I'm so much smarter than everybody else on the planet, and I was going to prove this girl who was advocating for my kid, prove her wrong. But little did I know that there was some information in there that knocked me on my butt. When Dr. Paul Thomas revealed that the hepatitis B vaccine has 250 grams of aluminum in it, I fell out of my seat. I mean, my jaw was on the floor. I didn't know what else could have caused my child to be so sick when she was born. She was on breast milk, that was it. And I knew in my heart, that was where my research started. And so from there, I started researching all of the ingredients, all of the package inserts, all of the reactions, the whole thing that everybody does once they find out. I started reading all of the studies, everything, and I still decided to let her get shots for school. And I thought to myself a really horrible thing. I thought, she didn't die the first time. Maybe she won't die this time. And I took the risk because our doctor told us that was the best thing to do. But I kick myself every day thinking, what if? What if that would have been the time? I don't know why I did it. And then 3 weeks later, she ended up in the hospital again. And her brain was swelling and she couldn't move her neck. We had to take an ambulance. I kept asking them, could this be from the shots? Could this be from the shots? And they wouldn't answer me. They wouldn't tell me anything. They sent us home with no diagnosis. They had to spend the night in the ER until the brain swelling went down and she wasn't in pain, and they sent us home. And that was the end of it. Me and my husband were united front after that, no more. And that's pretty much the gist of our story.
But how are they today?
Today, my eldest daughter is still dealing with the ADHD that she got from her round of shots when she was about to go to school at 4.5. She is in 7th grade now, writing on an exemption here in California that's not even supposed to be legal. So we're literally counting the days until my children get kicked out of school. It's affected every single part of our lives, from my income to my mental health to my husband's mental health. I've lost friends, I've lost family. It's been the worst experience of my life because I trusted our doctor, which was the stupidest thing I ever did. But you want to do what's best for your children, and when they're in an emergency situation, you expect those people to know what's best for them. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to come and share my story today. As clunky as it's been, if it can help anybody, even just one person, that's what I'm here for, because it's really not rare. They make it seem like it's rare, and it's just not.
You told your story beautifully, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly.
Sorry for what happened.
We all are. We're all sorry about it.
What do you feel when you walk around the bus?
It's hard not to cry. It's hard not to just feel the pain of the other moms and dads and the old gal who walked out here before me. I mean, we want to have trust, but it's so hard to now, you know? Every single time we walk into a facility or a clinic or a hospital, we're on guard, you know? It's so hard to have any trust anymore, you know?
Yeah, they messed with our babies.
You know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.